The decades-long war on marijuana is slowly coming to an end. More than 50 years since then-President Nixon declared a war on drugs, the U.S. has spent $47 billion combating drug use, with 15.7 million people arrested on marijuana charges in just the last 2 decades. Now it's time to wake up, Washington, because Americans' views on marijuana use have been rapidly changing. A recent Pew poll shows 57% of people believe the plant should be legalized for recreational use. We recently attended the Cannabis Policy Summit in Washington, D.C., where most people we spoke to believe legalization could have a far-reaching impact, particularly on minorities. Take a look.
I think that for so long, people have been held back for it, incarcerated.
It should have never been illegal in the first place, and this is really the first way that we can help Black and brown folks all across the country.
No one should be in prison for a plant.
Inmates sitting in federal prison for their lives, while we have other companies making billions of dollars for the same thing. People's lives are at stake. There's nothing more important than the people in federal prison for marijuana. We need to get them out. They got arrested in the 1990s when we had tough on drug policies going on in this country, and they're still there, and we need to get them out.
It's a closet issue, but it's an issue that needs to be thoroughly discussed.
It's proven that it can help with so many different things. As I said before, alcohol is poison, but the culture around that is just very normalized, whereas cannabis is a medicine and it's still very taboo.
We sell the majority of our products to 60 to 70-year-old adults. They really need the medicine for their joints and stuff, and they're tired of taking prescription pills.
I think that descheduling needs to happen because we need more freedom, and that could bring more money into the economy of America.
This is a bipartisan issue. I mean, Republicans, they should be the top of the Republicans' food chains when it comes to economy, states' rights, everything that they preach.
In a historic shift, the Biden administration is taking a step towards reclassifying marijuana as a less dangerous drug. But with millions of Americans arrested in the past and thousands currently still serving sentences on marijuana convictions, how will the reclassification affect their future? Joining us now from the Last Prisoner Project are Executive Director and General Counsel Sarah Gersten and Director of Advocacy Stephanie Shepard. Thank you both for joining me here today. Sarah, I want to start with you. Marijuana has been listed as a Schedule I drug for more than 50 years. But what will President Biden's effort to move it to a Schedule III drug actually mean for Americans?
So, as you noted, this is an incredibly significant move, and I don't want to downplay the significance of the reclassification of cannabis from Schedule I. This is the most significant shift in cannabis policy and drug policy really since the inception of the Controlled Substances Act. Right now, cannabis is scheduled as the most serious drug classification, Schedule I, meaning that the federal government believes that it has no medical value and a high potential for abuse. So it is monumental for the federal government to acknowledge that there is medicinal properties to cannabis. But unfortunately, the federal government is still really lagging behind the vast majority of states and the vast majority of the American populace who believe that cannabis should be fully legalized. And I want to make that very clear. This shift to a Schedule III will loosen restrictions on research and medical uses of cannabis. It will not fully legalize cannabis at the federal level, and it remains to be seen how it will interplay with those existing state and medical markets.
So talking in terms of a timeline, Sarah, how soon and where will the effects of this move be felt? And will it encourage maybe more states to move towards making marijuana legal?
So, of course, this is the federal government. This is not going to happen instantaneously. This is really just the next step in a lengthy administrative rulemaking process. So right now, the rule goes to the Office of Management and Budget. OMB will send it back to the DEA, and they'll initiate the notice and comment period. That could come with administrative hearings. There might be legal challenges. We've already seen groups coming out to say that they will initiate legal challenges to this proceeding. And so this could be a months, years-long process, but I do think there's a huge incentive for this administration to get it done before the election. I do think that move will encourage states, those few holdout states that don't have yet a legal or medical marketplace, and again, that's the vast minority of states, to legalize marijuana, at least in some form, because again, the most significant effect is going to be loosening those restrictions around research. And so states will actually be able to better see that legalizing cannabis, at least for medical use, is really in the best interest of public health and public safety.
Stephanie, turning to you, you were convicted of conspiracy to distribute marijuana in 2010. As a first-time nonviolent offender, you served 9 years of your 10-year sentence. Could you tell us about that part of your life and what happened?
It was a hard pill to swallow, but I swallowed it because at the time it was illegal, and I accepted that. It's affected my life mostly by the amount of loss that I felt. Everyone loses something in life. You lose jobs, you lose relationships, you lose money, but consider what that must feel like to lose all of that at once. And that's the most difficult part about it. And you can't do anything about it.
Did you find that there was, obviously there's this advocacy organization you're a part of, and there's other advocacy organizations in this realm, but did you find that back then, I mean, that was over 10 years ago, there was a support system at that point?
No, there was nothing like Last Prisoner Project around at that time. Even as state after state began legalizing, and I'm sitting in prison thinking, well, what about me? If it's now acceptable and being normalized out in the world, what about me and the thousands of people like me sitting in prisons? So we didn't have this type of advocacy. We didn't have these voices that we have now. So it's amazing to be able to be a part of it. And it's healing for me to be a part of it, honestly. Because it's infuriating to see what's going on in the industry today, but know that Michael Woods is serving a life sentence for cannabis.
Sarah, moving back to the Biden administration's move, I mean, did this catch you by surprise, or is this a part of a larger movement, a larger trend happening in the country?
This is absolutely part of a larger trend. It's something that really cannabis advocates, the cannabis industry, have been waiting with bated breath to happen since President Biden announced in 2022 his initiation of this process to reschedule cannabis. And that was really part of a three-part announcement where he initiated this process, which started with Health and Human Services to reclassify cannabis. He also issued mass pardons for cannabis offenses at the federal level, and that's an action he followed up with the expansion of last year. And we do hope that this is just the first few steps in an even larger journey. Again, the vast majority of Americans believe that cannabis should be fully legalized and that no one should be incarcerated for cannabis. And that's another thing that President Biden campaigned on in 2020. He's made that a part of his racial justice and criminal justice plans. And so those pardons are a good first step, but they haven't done anything to actually release individuals who are still incarcerated at the federal level for cannabis. So we are very hopeful that this action will embolden the administration to take further clemency action to actually release those individuals from prison.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be watching to see what the administration does and to see if President Biden says anything about this on the campaign trail. Stephanie, now you're an advocate for those affected by marijuana-related sentences. How have minorities been disproportionately impacted by the stringent laws and restrictions, and how has that affected American families?
As we know, Blacks are 4 to 5 times more likely to be arrested and given a lengthy prison sentence for cannabis. So as a Black woman myself, sitting there and getting this sentence and now being out and seeing what the industry is, that needs to trickle down. That needs to trickle down to the most vulnerable communities. It wasn't just me going to prison. It was my family. It was them going through the same struggles. And that trickles down to the community. And when a community is hurt, then this country is hurt. So it's really important that people realize that discrepancy in sentences and bring people home.
Absolutely. And Sarah, why do you think it's taken really so long for marijuana to be legalized at the state level and for this move to happen from the Biden administration at the federal level?
I think it really speaks to the kind of stigma that Stephanie's talking about. We know now that cannabis prohibition was never based on public health or public safety. It was always based on marginalizing communities, particularly communities of color. And I think there's really been a recognition of that amongst the American people who, again, the vast majority from all demographics believe that cannabis should be fully legalized. And states have caught up to that. Again, we have a vast majority of states that have some form of legalized marijuana. And so I think that we now have reached a tipping point, and this move shows to me it's just a matter of time before cannabis is fully legalized in all states and at the federal level.
Stephanie, obviously none of this will give you your years back, the years you spent behind bars, but what is your hope for others who are still imprisoned or, carrying criminal records at this point?
Not only will it not help me with the time that I served, I'm still currently on supervised release. So I'm still on probation. It gives me hope that people will be able to come home and be reunited with their families and made whole again, and humanely made whole. Letting people out of prison with absolutely nothing is not a way to re-enter people to society. So that needs to be worked on. That needs to be a more closely looked at aspect of, once people do come home, are we going to continue to set up roadblocks for them? And that means through jobs and housing and banking even. So there's a lot of aspects to it, but I hope to see people come home and reunite with their families.
Sarah, Stephanie just touched on this a bit, but I want to get your perspective. How will the Last Prisoner Project continue to make a difference to those affected by the issues in the marijuana industry?
So again, we are really hopeful that this move is the first step on a long journey, but that we're just at the start of that journey. As Stephanie mentioned, the work doesn't end when cannabis is fully legalized. Even if the federal government completely removed cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, that would remove criminal penalties prospectively, but it's not going to address the people who are already incarcerated. It's not going to remove the convictions for cannabis that are already on individuals' records. So we have all that work to do to reform the criminal legal implications of the past prohibition of cannabis. And to Stephanie's point, there's so much work that needs to be done, not just for those individuals, but for these communities that have been so harmed that need to be made whole. So again, we hope that this journey ends not just with a move to Schedule 3, but with full legalization, the release of all cannabis prisoners, and the reinvestment in the communities most harmed by the war on drugs.
Well, Sarah Gersten and Stephanie Shepard, thank you so much for helping us shed a light on this issue. The work you're doing is obviously, having major impact across the country. So we appreciate your time and your insight today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.